to betray him unto them. And when they heard it, they were glad, and they promised to give him money. And he sought how he might conveniently betray him. And the first day of unleavened bread, when they killed the Passover, the disciples said unto him, Where wilt thou that we go and sorrowful? And said unto him one by one, Is it I? And another said, Is it I? And he answered and said unto them, Is it one of the 12 that it is one of the 12 that dippeth with me in the dish? And the Son of Man indeed goeth, as it is written of him. But woe to the man by whom the Son of Man is betrayed. Good were it for that man if he never were been born. As they did eat.
The rabbi did not take on very many young men to train. He couldn't have a whole horde of people following him everywhere he went. Only a select few would be allowed to live with the rabbi and learn his teachings and his ways. The prospects would be intensively tested to see not if they knew God's word, they all knew it, they had memorized it, but rather if they understood it, if they knew what it meant, if they knew how it should affect their lives. This is the backdrop for the calling of the disciples. This is the way it was normally done. Being a rabbi's disciple was akin to being accepted into Harvard, which is currently the hardest college in the country to get into. But Jesus calling his own disciples was similar to having Harvard call up a student who probably only had a GED and would never actually submit an application on his own because he knew he wouldn't get accepted. But it would be Harvard calling up that student and telling him into that school. It was very backwards for the day. Jesus took young men who, for the most part, were not the elite, and told them to follow him, to be his disciples, to walk with him, to learn his ways, and to learn to be like him. Now, this would have been a great honor. A great honor to be accepted as a rabbi's disciple, especially for men like Simon or Levi. Simon had most likely gone as far as he was going to go with his training. Maybe he had not gotten any further than his memorization of the Hebrew Scriptures. We don't really know. But his schooling might have ended at 13. Because now, as we see when he was called, he had taken on a profession. He was a fisherman. His ambitions to be something more than that were gone. Simon's often thought to have been the oldest of the disciples. And then there was Levi. He too had taken on a profession. However, a less honorable one than Simon. Levi was a hated tax collector. Not only had he not advanced in his studies, he had chosen to take on a profession that often involved cheating and overcharging those from whom he collected taxes. And he would have been spurned by his own countrymen. Being chosen as Jesus' disciple was an honor for each of these 12 men. But it was an honor which probably humbled them, because they realized they hadn't earned it. They had not received the position on their own merit. They hadn't received the position because they had been great in their studies. It had been an unearned privilege given to them by Jesus. The position of a disciple of a rabbi was an honored one. The theme of that position with Jesus began to take on an even greater weight. As Jesus taught and healed the sick, his fame grew. And so did the honored position that each of them had as one of his disciples. Of a rabbi. But it's another thing to be a disciple of this rabbi. The one who was performing miracles and even raising the dead. The whispers grew. Was Jesus the promised Messiah? Was he the one who would save Israel? Was he the one who would drive away the Romans and restore Israel to his former glory? Many people began to think so. And Jesus' fame grew. His standing in the people's eyes grew. The disciples, on the other hand, knew he was the promised Messiah. And they were the inner circle of the future king. Had they understood how that kingdom was going to come about, they might have curbed their ambitions a little bit. Had they understood how the kingdom was going to come about. They may not have desired recognition and position in the kingdom, but they didn't understand it. They thought it would be a physical kingdom on this earth, and so they started jockeying for position in this soon-to-be-established kingdom. Mark 10 tells us the story, verses 35 to 37. Then James and John, the son of Zebedee, came to him, saying, "Teacher, we want you to do for us whatever we ask." And he said to them, "What do you want me to do for you?" They said to him, "Grant us that we may sit, one on your right hand and one on your left hand, in your glory." Skip down to verse 41. And when the 10 heard it, they began to be greatly displeased with James and John. James and John asked for the 2 top positions in Jesus' coming kingdom. It made the other 10 mad. Why? Because they wanted those positions as well, of course. And we see that pride had begun to take hold in the disciples. No longer were they simply pleased and humbled that Jesus had chosen men like themselves to be his disciples. Now they had ambitions. They had ambitions to hold high positions and to receive the glory, the honor, the recognition that came along with those positions. Their humility at being chosen despite lacking the qualifications was gone, and pride had been put in its place. Secondly, they became unwilling to listen to someone who was wiser than they were. We see this in a couple places, starting in Mark 10. I'm going to reread verse 41, and then continue down through 45. And when the 10 heard it, they began to be greatly displeased with James and John. But Jesus called them to himself and said to them, "You know that those who are considered rulers over the Gentiles lord it over them, and their great ones exercise authority over them. Yet it shall not be so among you. But whoever desires to become great among you shall be your servant. And whoever of you desires to be first shall be slave of all. For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life a ransom for many." You know that those who are considered rulers of the Gentile lord it over them, yet it shall not be so among you. Jesus was clearly a wiser man than any of the disciples, and they should have taken his words to heart. They should have checked their ambitions. They should have checked their egos. They should have chosen to serve others just as Jesus had done, but they did not. They did not take his words to heart. They did not choose to do the work of a servant to the others in the group. And as we jump ahead to the Last Supper, we see that Jesus is doing the work of a servant. He is the one who is washing the feet of the others. None of the disciples had been willing to place themselves in that position. They did not lay aside their ambitions. They did not listen to one who was wiser than they. We see more of the same in Mark 14, starting in verse 27. Then Jesus said to them, "All of you will be made to stumble because of me this night, for it is written, I will strike the shepherd and the sheep will be scattered. But after I have been raised, I will go before you to Galilee." Peter said to him, "Even if all are made to stumble, yet I will not be." Jesus said to him, "Assuredly I say to you that tonight, even this night, before the rooster crows twice, you shall deny me 3 times. But he spoke more vehemently, "If I have to die with you, I will not deny you." And they all said likewise. Jesus flat out told them they were going to fail. He told them plainly that they would not stand by him. And yet every one of the 11 remaining disciples told Jesus that he was wrong. They told him that they would stand with him. They told him that they would die with him before they would ever deny him. They were not willing to listen to one who was wiser than they. They thought they knew better. They had become so confident in themselves that they were willing to correct Jesus' assessment of them. They were so confident in their own strength. They were confident in their own loyalty. They were so sure of themselves that they were unconcerned, even when their Lord was troubled. Even when he said to them, "My soul is exceedingly sorrowful, even to death. Stay here and watch." They could not. When he told them to pray lest they enter into temptation, they could not. They could not keep themselves awake because they did not take the situation seriously, even though their Lord had warned them. They would not listen to one who was wiser than they. They were confident in their own strength and loyalty. They were confident in their own ideas of how Jesus' ascension to the throne would take place. And the most confident one of all was Simon Peter. He vehemently declared, "If I have to die with you, I will not deny you." And they all said likewise. None of the disciples understood how things were actually going to play out. They all thought they knew. But they never envisioned Jesus dying at the hands of those who hated him. Even though he had told them that this would happen, they thought they knew better. They may have believed that there would be some form of conflict. They may have believed that there would be opposition, but if Jesus was going to be king, then clearly that opposition would be suppressed. That opposition would not stand a chance against his supernatural power. He would simply crush those who opposed him. And they never envisioned a defeat of any kind. With that kind of thinking, you can see why they were so confident that they would deny Jesus. I do have to give some respect to Peter, though. His denial of Jesus is the strongest of any of the disciples, much more airtime than any of the others, even though they all left him. But I also believe that Peter may have been the most realistic and the most loyal of any of the whole group. The reason I say that he was the most realistic was because he's the one disciple who actually prepared for conflict. If I were to say it in today's terms, we might say that Peter was packing heat, or he was carrying a concealed weapon. He was carrying a sword under his clothing. Now, he was a fisherman. There was no reason normally he would have been carrying a sword, except that he was expecting conflict. He realized that it might be necessary for him to fight in order to help Jesus ascend to the throne. And he was doing what he could to prepare for it. And when the time came, when the soldiers came to take Jesus, Peter did not run. At first, he was as good as his word. He stood and fought. He drew his sword and took a swing at the nearest person. But it was only once he saw that Jesus was not resisting, but was submitting to arrest, that he ran. Peter was realistic in his idea that there may be conflict to overcome, and he had prepared himself to fight his way through it. Peter may also have been the most loyal of the 11. Mark 14:50 says, "Then they all forsook him and fled." But let's jump down to verse 54. "But Peter followed him at a distance, right into the courtyard of the high priest, and he sat with the servants and warmed himself at the fire." Now, we don't have record of any of the other disciples hanging around to see what would happen. Only Peter. He also did not want to go back to the place where he was staying and lock the door behind him. It was this loyalty to Jesus that in fact placed him in the position where he felt the need to betray Jesus. If he had not followed to see what would happen, he never would have denied Jesus. He wouldn't have been there to do so. Peter was the most realistic and most loyal of the disciples. But even he denied Jesus. And each of the disciples ran away from him when their own skin was on the line. Pride, shown through their desire for position and recognition, shown through their unwillingness to listen to one who is wiser than they, and shown through their unshakable self-confidence. Pride was their undoing. It was the cause of their spiritual failure. These same actions in our lives are evidences of pride. They're telltale signs that we're getting ready for spiritual failure. Do you have ambitions, spiritually speaking, that you want to hold? Do you have recognition that you would like to receive, or people you want to lead? Are you willing to listen to the advice of others, particularly those who have walked with God for longer than you have? Or are you deaf to their counsel? Are you supremely confident in your own strength, in your own thinking, of your own ability to resist temptation? If the answer is yes, then we're set up for failure. Pride goes before destruction, and an arrogant spirit before a fall. We've looked at the negative, we've looked at the steps towards pride, but what's the positive? What are things supposed to look like? If the root of pride is failure, what's the root of success? What are the outward signs? We know that the opposite of pride is humility, right? And we have an illustration of that in this chapter as well. Let's take a quick look at it. It's found in verses 3 through 9. And being in Bethany at the house of Simon the leper, as he sat at the table, a woman came having an alabaster flask of very costly oil of spikenard. Then she broke the flask and poured it on his head. But there were some who were indignant among themselves and said, "Why was this fragrant oil wasted? For it might have been sold for more than 300 denarii and given to the poor." And they criticized her sharply. But Jesus said, "Let her alone. Why do you trouble her? She has done a good work for me. For you have the poor with you always, and whenever you wish you may do them good. But me you do not have always. She has done what she could. She has come beforehand to anoint my body for burial. Surely I say to you, wherever this gospel is preached in the whole world, that what this woman has done, will also be told as a memorial to her." The story of Mary anointing Jesus with costly perfume is a story of humility. It was her humility that caused her to forget about herself and be extravagant towards Jesus. She didn't care how much it would cost. The perfume was worth a year's income. She didn't care what people said, for they spoke of the waste of such a gesture. She didn't care if she was misunderstood. For the reason she anointed Jesus was only understood by her and Jesus. She did not care if she was placing herself in a low position, for she took the position of a servant, anointing his head and his feet, and placed herself even lower by wiping his feet with her hair. She chose to be extravagant towards Jesus, no matter what the cost, no matter what other people did. And when she saw Peter warming himself, she looked at him and said, "You also were with Jesus of Nazareth." But she denied it, saying, "I neither know nor understand what you are saying." And he went out on the porch, and a rooster crowed. And the servant girl saw him again and began to say to those who stood by, "This is one of them." But he denied it again. A little later, those who stood by said to Peter again, "Surely you are one of them, for you are a Galilean, and your speech shows it." Then he began to curse and swear, "I do not know this man of whom you speak." The second time the rooster crowed. And Peter called to mind the word that Jesus had said to him, "Before the rooster crows twice, you will deny me 3 times." And when he thought about it, he wept. In a lot of ways, this is such a brutal end to this chapter. Peter, that close friend of Jesus and the strong one who loudly pledged his allegiance to him, had failed miserably. He denied ever knowing Jesus. And then he realized what he had done. And it tore him up. He wept. But while it is brutal in this ending, we see the seeds of restoration for Peter. Peter realized he had failed miserably. He realized that he had done the very thing he had vehemently told Jesus he would not do. He realized he had sinned, and he had great sorrow over it. Is not sorrow over sin the first step towards restoration? If there's never the realization of sin, if there's never sorrow over sin, then there's no moving forward. There's no recovery, there's no restoration. The first steps towards restoration are the steps Peter unknowingly took. Realizing his sin and having sorrow over it. The second thing I'd like us to see is that all of the disciples failed. Every last one of them. Judas was the betrayer. Peter flat out cursed and swore that he didn't know Jesus. And the other 10 turned tail and ran when being around Jesus became dangerous. Close friends of Jesus failed him. When we fail, we are not alone. We're in the company of the 12 disciples. These men deserted Jesus, but they still went on to lead vibrant, amazing Christian lives. A failure or a collection of failures does not mean that God can no longer use us. It does not mean that we are finished. It's a setback, yes, but failing does not make us a failure. Each of the disciples failed. Each Christian that has lived since then has failed. When we fail, we're in the company of Christians. It's not about having failed. It's about how we move on from it. And the third and final thing that I would like to share is a verse that I guess I see as quite possibly the most beautiful verse of this whole chapter here in Mark 14. It's something that Jesus said while he was predicting that his disciples would desert him. I'll start at verse 27 just for a little bit of context. Then Jesus said to them, "All of you will be made to stumble because of me this night. Strike the shepherd, and the sheep will be scattered." Now here's verse 28. "But after I have been raised, I will go before you to Galilee." Now on the very surface of this verse, there doesn't seem to be anything that special about it. It's kind of, sounds more like... But what is beautiful about it is what it implies. It implies that Jesus is going to gather with them again once everything is over and he's been raised back to life. Stumble, even though they will all desert him, even though they will all disassociate themselves from him and deny him, they will be restored. He has plans to meet up with them again after all that had taken place. They will all gather together with him in Galilee. They will do him wrong, but he will forgive them. They will be restored back into his inner circle. They will remain his friends. They will remain his followers. They will remain his disciples. He would forgive, and they would be restored. But after I have been raised, I will go before you to Galilee. You're going to come too. Meet me there. Beautiful. I love that. Each one of us fails. The realization of it and the sorrow over it, and God will restore each and every one who turns back to him.
Thank you, Sheldon, for your thoughts and preparation. The offering today is for the general fund. The offering plate is in the back, so you can feel free to give there. Announcements. There are Wednesday evening prayer groups at 7 o'clock. There is a congregational meeting to vote on the future of affiliation with the Church of the Brethren on Thursday. This Thursday, September the 3rd at 7. Looking forward to next Sunday. The offering is for the pastor's love gift. And last Sunday's information listed there. Happy birthday this week goes out to Pierre Cataret and Carson Ocker. Dennis has something to share at this time, and then you guys will open it up for you guys.
This is in relationship to our meeting on Thursday night. We will be taking a vote on Thursday night concerning and the recommendation of the board is to separate from the denomination. I would like to stress that as many of you be here as possible. We want to have an in-person meeting, and we will give ballots out at that meeting for each of you to sign. We want to have a permanent record of each member and their decision, their vote concerning this issue. As I mentioned before, it's important that parents discuss this with their children, the children that are members, because we would like a vote from each member of our congregation here. And we'd like if all members have a vote. So we encourage you to be here. That being said, if you know you cannot be here for one reason or another, see me today and get a ballot. We'll have a ballot that will be counted on Thursday night. So whether you're listening to me or watching on YouTube, if you cannot be here on Thursday night, contact me today and I will see that you get a ballot so that your vote can be counted. In addition to that, if you have any questions, I also encourage all of you to be in prayer. This is, to me, a very weighty decision, and we have not only a separation issue, but we also have an issue of what happens after.